Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Stephen Railston. I'm your host today and I'm joined by my two colleagues, Tyrone Marshall and Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel's had a little bit of time away, but he's back and he's raring to go this weekend. Samuel, how's your break and how are you?
The downtime was very good, thank you. I didn't go all the way to New York during my week off, but it was very satisfying, very, very much so.
We'll get on to that, I'm sure, in this podcast. There's plenty to discuss. Ty, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Stephen. I'm good. Unfortunately, I've been working the last 2 weeks, and I'm actually off next week now when games resume. If there's any advice I can give young aspiring football journalists out there, it'd be don't marry a teacher.
Is there another trip to Portugal on the cards, Ty, or is it Blackpool Beach?
It's France, actually. France.
Very nice.
Yeah. I've got family in France as well, so jet setting all around Europe, Stephen.
All over the world,
unfortunately, more games are on.
Yeah, international traveller. We'll start with the international break on that subject, Samuel. We'll just quickly get our teeth stuck into it before we move on to the kind of week's news. And we'll have to start with Scott McTominay, who was in fantastic form for Scotland. He scored 4 goals across 2 games, a brace against Spain. And I noticed today in the press conference, obviously, there was a question about potentially moving McTominay to striker because he played there when he was younger, didn't he, Samuel? I mean, do you think that could be on the cards? And what did you think of his performances?
Not going off Ten Hag's answer to me, where he very much confirmed that he saw him as a midfielder, which understand if they've got 2 number 9s available at the moment, and it sounds like Anthony Marshall is actually still fit 3 weeks on from resuming training. I know it's not April Fool's yet either, so it's genuinely true. We're not trying to play a trick on anyone there. I suppose the downside for McTominay is that nobody saw these goals unless they went on Twitter, because international football, certainly in England now, if you want to watch it and it's not an England game, you have to subscribe to some new channel which is owned by a Norwegian company, and they seem to have just about every other game going on there. But I'm certainly not desperate to watch European Championship qualifiers or Netherlands Gibraltar or Scotland Cyprus, but occasionally there'll be a game of interest. And with the Cyprus game, you think, well, it's 2 goals against Cyprus. It's not much to write home about, but 2 goals against Spain, even this Spain, who really are a shadow of the great teams between 2008 and 2012. And Spain have been in relative decline for a while, but it's still some going for Scotland to win 2-0 and for McTominay to get 2 goals against them. And certainly the second one was very well taken. He's looking at his goals for United. I think he's got 18 United goals. There is a similarity in his technique, the way he just hits the ball quite a pure manner on the laces, and doesn't really think twice about it, and he can be quite prompt with his shooting, and that was very much how he scored the second goal. The first one, there was an element of fortune about it, and that it deflected past Arrizabalaga, but a good response from a player. Given that the United club captain the previous week said that he doesn't think he has anything to prove at that level, and we can get into the minutiae of what Harry Maguire was referring to, whether he's on about international level or just playing at a high level, which is what England do, what United do. But it's not. It's what he said pretty much jars with what Erik Ten Hag says in most press conferences, which is good is not good enough, and satisfaction leads to laziness. And given that Maguire didn't have the best of nights for England in Italy, in that he committed a foul and given the ball away in the move that led to Italy's goal, it was a bit of a strange thing to say. But I think with Maguire, he's approaching probably the end game now at United, and it does feel like he's pretty much done at United. A lot might hinge on what happens with Victor Lindelof, because he said that he might have to assess his situation in the summer. It's been quite curious the way that's played out, in that United have got Maguire down to be sold in the summer, yet in the last 2 games he started ahead of Lindelof, and there certainly wasn't a great deal of sense behind Lindelof not starting in Seville against Real Betis. You'd think that's a game that's suited to the way he plays as a centre-back. You could kind of see what Ten Hag was thinking in playing Maguire against Alexander Mitrovic in the Cup quarter-final against Fulham, but Maguire got embarrassed by him and was booked for cynically tugging at him. So although he's done well for England and did well for England at the World Cup specifically this season, it's not really done any it's not done wonders for Maguire's stock at club level. He's still very much a reserve centre-back. He might not be fourth choice centre-back anymore, but if you're the United captain and you're an £80 million defender, and he is still the world's most expensive defender, coming out with that soundbite last week, as I said, it jarred with what Ten Hag's outlook is on things at United, and it jars with what United supporters expect from United players.
Going back to McTominay for a second, I presume you both saw the Netherlands had 52 shots against Gibraltar.
I didn't
did not score. Weghorst didn't score 52 shots. I reckon McTominay would have scored a few of those chances. I definitely.
He was pretty brutal in his self-assessment, Weghorst, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He's a good speaker, isn't he, sometimes, I think. Sticking with Maguire then, Ty, is it fair to say it's more likely that he's going to depart this summer? There's a few months remaining this season, obviously. He slipped down the pecking order, but quite interesting. I mean, as Samuel's just said, he actually has played over Lindelof recently. But do you think, in your opinion, this season is most likely to be his last at Old Trafford?
Yeah, probably just about. I would favour that outcome. But I think you had Lindelof in the international break sort of pouring shade on his own future as well. So there's no way United can afford to lose both of them. They are as a group of four centre halves, they are probably as good as you're going to get in the Premier League for all the stick that they get. Lindelof's very reliable. Maguire is good at what he does in certain games. So they are a good group. The issue for Maguire is playing to keep his England place, and I think there's in a way, I think he's decent to what he does for United. If United paid 25 million for him and never made him captain, you probably look at him at third choice centre half and think, yeah, it's pretty good. That he's English, he ticks a homegrown box, but those things didn't happen. They paid 80 million for him and made him captain after 6 months, and he's always going to have that price tag round his neck. United will always be associated with having an £80 million squad player, and it's difficult for him to remain club captain if he stays at the club next season and his role is still starting 1 in 4 games against pretty poor teams. I think he spoke. I can't remember when it was. It might have been before the international break, actually, about how if you look at my record, we've won the last 9. I think it is now that he's played in, but the hardest team that played in that run is Fulham. The reality is he's not really trusted to play any of the big 6. In the entire season, probably the toughest game he's had is Brighton or Brentford away. He just doesn't play against the good teams. So I think he's become a bit of a I don't want to say joke figure. That's a bit harsh, but he's criticised for things that aren't his fault, I think, at times, and that was the case last season. And I think a clean break probably suits both parties, to be honest. This summer, if United can pocket 30 million for him, something like that, then I think they'd probably see it as a good deal, but they would need to sign another centre half. I don't think there's anyone in the squad who would naturally fill that role as third or fourth choice. I think it's too early for anyone like Ted and Mengi, for example. So I think they would have to sign someone. And then, of course, you've got the Lindelof issue. I mean, I think Lindelof has always struck me as someone who's pretty content playing that role, and but maybe he'll get sick of it as well. So yeah, I would lean towards it being his last season purely because I think it would suit all parties, but I don't think that's necessarily guaranteed.
I think for him personally as well, a good time to move on after finally winning the trophy. He's won that trophy, he's got that piece of silverware, and he can kind of leave knowing that he has won something during his time at the club. Although supporters will remember his time with mixed memories, should we say. If we move on to the Old Trafford development story, then Samuel, from yesterday, you wrote the line that they're in favour of redeveloping the stadium at the moment, obviously if the Glazers stay with their majority stake, instead of building a new stadium from scratch. Can you tell the listeners a bit more about that, please, if they haven't already read the story?
Yeah, there was quite a lot of detail that I was able to gather on it over a number of months. Essentially, the way it was framed to me was that rebuilding the stadium, knocking down Old Trafford, that would actually be a quicker process, and just modernising Old Trafford is a lot more gradual. I was told that there could be at least a year taken up by meetings with the council, doing a town hall, speaking to local residents who might have any issues about what United were planning. So the first year of a 10-year plan is just on the planning. Nothing. That's before a builder comes on the site or puts his hard hat on. And the provisional plan is that there's a year dedicated to each stand. So once they actually get into the construction of it, and after you've done the construction or whilst you're doing the construction, I can't quite remember whether it was simultaneously, but if you're doing that, you're going to look at new roadways, new access. I think they see opportunities around the ground as well. The suggestion has been that the ticket office would be knocked down. The ticket office is based just behind the North Stand, now known as the Sir Alex Ferguson Stand. That would be knocked down, and they think that they could have a hotel there, and that's probably something that United have missed out on for quite some time. There's the Premier Inn that's just down the road that they used to have a tie-up with. I'm not sure if they still do, but used to be able to have an overnight stay there and get a ticket. And of course, you've got the hotel football that's owned by the class of '92 members, which is pretty much back in the days when there was some animosity between the club and those former, well, those club greats, and it was Ed Woodward who was running the show. It was almost seen as like a tank on United's lawn, but that's a much more, collegiate relationship now that Richard Arnold is the chief executive. So they've missed out on these opportunities, but they think that they could have a hotel in the northwest. I think it's the northwest corner of the ground, roughly where the ticket office is. The East Stand car park, which is, you come out the East Stand and the gates that are there is where the Trinity statue is. It's the car park people use on a non-match day if you want to go into the megastore or have a look around. They think that they could have a fan park there, which is something that they've got at Anfield behind, I think it's behind the main stand, and the main stand was redone. Very impressive. That reopened in 2016. So again, that's another place where I think, the hotel football, I think that's what they do. A lot of fans go in there on match day. So United are actually losing income by those fans going in there rather than going to a dedicated hub for supporters. I think the plan originally, when Gary Neville announced his retirement, his testimonial was that he would arrange for some fan park to be a hub where supporters could gather. In the end, I think he just took that idea and has made his own money out of it with the rest of his old teammates. In terms of other ones, I was told that I think it's about 52,000 they think they can keep the capacity at. They can still have 50 gates of 52,000 while the ground is under construction. One of the plans mooted is just to have the second tier dedicated as hospitality seats, which is pretty much the case at Wembley. If anyone's been to the new Wembley Stadium, if you're in the second tier, you seem to have some form of hospitality ticket. It's not necessarily the high-end hospitality, but there are hospitality seats in just about every section of the stadium. I think the South Stand, sooner or later, whether it's a new stadium, whether it's not a new stadium, that is just going to get demolished, knocked down, because it's quite dated compared to the other stands. It's not symmetrical with the other stands as well, in that it's only one tier. Every other stand they're on the same level. I think they've been looking at certainly having a third tier on the Stretford end and the scoreboard end. I think the roofing would have to change. They think that the acoustics can be improved, and the acoustics with the shape of Old Trafford, it doesn't feel conducive to generating a properly good atmosphere. You look at a lot of modern stadia, they're bowls really, and that's the way sound's going to carry a lot more easily. And in terms of the prospect of actually having a new Old Trafford, they would look at rotating the stadium. So the Stretford end would back onto the railway line rather than backing onto the industrial part behind it. They think that's a good way of being able to get round the railway line issue, which has proven prohibitive in terms of expanding the South Stand and taking the capacity further up. But as I said as I wrote in the story, Joel Glazer's preference is to keep Old Trafford. Even though he's not stepped foot inside Old Trafford, he's not stepped foot in Manchester for nearly 4 years. And that view is shared by people on the ground in Manchester as well, who work at the club at Old Trafford on a daily basis. One, because it's Old Trafford, it's an institution, essentially. But also they believe that because it's got that heritage, because it's got that character, if they were to move into a new stadium, the concern they have is that within a pretty quick time frame, people wouldn't be particularly impressed by it. I mean, the Emirates Stadium opened only 16 years ago, I think, or 16 and a half years ago. And already the other week we saw the roof leaking there, but also that has always struck me as quite a soulless bowl. I've never been a great fan of the new Wembley as a supporter experience. I mean, it was pretty good with Newcastle fans in there recently, and it certainly, when I covered some England games against Poland and Scotland, it was a hell of a lot better, but that's because there was some very ardent supporters, travelling supporters there to enhance the atmosphere. More often than not, it's always been pretty soulless. The Emirates has always been soulless, and so the argument is that although Tottenham Stadium is absolutely magnificent, and as a supporter experience, as a journalistic experience, it is as good as it gets, within a certain period of time, people might think, well, this is a bit soulless. It's just like most other new stadiums. And you can imagine there are some Tottenham fans that are still pining for White Hart Lane because that was what they were used to for decades. And that did have character, even though it was a pretty antiquated ground when I used to go there as a fan and as a journalist. So it's interesting how there are different viewpoints on it. But the fact of the matter is that they have looked at both options. They've looked at the option of knocking down Old Trafford. They've looked at the option of renovating it. It needs renovating if it's going to be kept. I mean, I'd be fascinated to know what I would certainly think United, what they should be doing. And I know they have been doing these surveys, engaging fan opinion on what season ticket holders would like, whether it's a new stadium or just improving Old Trafford. I'd be very interested to see what the results of that are. I think they should be transparent with that rather than just keeping it to themselves, because you'd get a pretty good gauge of what fans want, and ultimately that's what should be prioritised, because it's the supporters who pay their money, who go to the games, who have had some pretty naff facilities and some pretty torrid experiences. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people saw the video. It's a disgusting video of the toilet at Old Trafford.
I was just about to come on to that
the other week. Overflowing. And to be honest, sometimes when we, as you know, sometimes in the men's in the press room, the toilets are pretty filthy in there as well. And you shouldn't have that experience at a stadium that once held a Champions League final and is home to Manchester United. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And as you said, that story's been on the site for just over 24 hours. So I'm sure there's some details that I've not included in there. But there's certainly been a lot of things. There are a lot of things under consideration.
I think season ticket holders want three things. Number one, a roof that doesn't leak. Number two, toilets that don't overflow. And three, should we get rid of the Carlin as I've suggested and get supporters proper beer? Get
the most important.
Pepperoni.
Most important.
Yeah, you've got the wrong order there.
Best to last. Ty, where do you stand on this really? Because a lot of people kind of discuss the merit of maybe completely relocating a new site, for example, but Old Trafford's got such history and all the memories that have been made there, and a lot of supporters would like to see that redeveloped. Where do you kind of stand on that issue?
Yeah, I think the priority, if it's possible, has got to be, keeping that stadium and upgrading that stadium. I think that has to be the aim. And you've seen the best example of that is Anfield, really, and what the American owners at Liverpool have done with Anfield. And that's on a much smaller scale than what United are looking to do with Old Trafford. I mean, the capacity there was mid-40s. I think even when the new Anfield Road end opened, it's only going to be 61,000. But it shows what you can do with a bit of invention and thinking about these things outside the box, I guess, in a way. And Liverpool have got a bit more space, but it was always talked about that they were going to move to a different stadium. And in the end, they found a solution that keeps them at Anfield. And I think for United, the ideal solution has got to be Old Trafford. And they've got space in certain areas of that site. Obviously, the stadium's probably not located brilliantly in terms of the actual site, but I think there's probably ways around it now with modern technology and things like that can afford them to stay at Old Trafford, to keep that ground and make improvements that just upgrades it and lifts the capacity a bit.
Yeah, I'd definitely be in favour of redevelopment. I think keeping that history is very important, even if it's on the same location, to be fair. I mean, Spurs obviously moved in but it's the same location, the same site. And I think it's important for supporters to feel that history and feel that connection when going to games. We'll leave that there for part one, and we'll be back in a moment for part two. Samuel, so the big story on Friday, obviously both you guys were carrying in for the press conference, but the news that Luke Shaw is close to agreeing a new contract. Can you tell a bit more about that, please? Because Samuel absolutely loves discussing contracts.
Contract stories. Yeah, they are. They're nearly as tedious as takeover talk. But
go on, Samuel. It's a formality. Tick it off. Go on.
I mean, United extended his contract earlier in the year or earlier in the season. So that was always an indication that they would want to have a complete renewal. That will be announced sooner or later. I mean, Ten Hag was kind of caught on the back foot about that because the sourcing of it came from outside the club, as is often the case with these stories. United said that they wouldn't be announcing anything before the press conference. Sometimes they have done that with previous deals. I think Phil Jones and Ashley Young. In Ashley Young's case, an actual A4 piece of paper was handed out to us. It was like being back in the 80s when someone would come outside the stadium and just hand out a press release to journalists waiting. So I suppose from Luke Shaw's perspective, it's nice not to follow on from the Phil Jones contract announcement in I think it was February 2019, just before a press conference that news dropped. So with Shaw, he's got there in the when they signed him in 2014, you thought, well, that he needs to be United's, or he should be United's next left back for the next decade, and he has been, but it's been a pretty rocky road to that point. Obviously a horrendous injury in Eindhoven. His first season, he was very injury prone. He's had the tough love from Louis van Gaal. He's had the tough love from Jose Mourinho. He's had fat shaming online, which was, pretty torrid, really. There was even a journalist who was joining in or actually leading that against him. But he's had some good seasons. He's had one particularly excellent season. I think in 2020-21 he was United's best player. The season he actually won the Matt Busby Player of the Year award. When he was reminded of that, he said you could have picked anyone out of the hat. He was actually embarrassed by it. So being brutally honest, so far he still had just the one truly good season in his United career, and he is somewhat fortunate to still be at the club, given that he entered the last year of his contract before he signed a new one in late 2018. But he's got resilience about him, and going off this season, he was dreadful at Brentford, as they all were. He lost his place, and rightly so, and he regained it. And since then, he's not really looked back. There's still been the odd egregious performance like Anfield, but again, everyone was horrific at Anfield. By and large, he's been very good this season. He had a pretty good World Cup as well. It's difficult to identify a left back who's had a better season in the Premier League. It's not been a season where there've been so many left backs who've been really impressive. I mean, Zinchenko's been very good for our. I thought Dan Burn was having a pretty solid season until he got humiliated by Anthony in the cup final.
That's always going to happen.
But Shaw's done well this season. As the player ratings of the season so far gave him 8, which I think was pretty fair, and it obviously helps United that he was suspended for the Ukraine game, so he's had a week off ahead of the Newcastle match, and he deserves it. I mean, it's a logical extension, because not only does it mean they're keeping a player who's been in pretty good form and has done decently during his United career, but they've got Malacia in as a younger backup, and they're a step closer to getting rid of Alex Telles permanently.
I think people forget how bad that injury was, actually, and how well he's done to kind of sustain or get back to those kind of levels pre-injury.
It was horrific. I was at that.
Brilliant few years. A horrible injury, wasn't it? Yeah. A really horrible injury.
Yeah, I think that was my second European away game covering United, and you knew immediately that it was dreadful, and obviously with the clips on Twitter, and it was pretty quick and getty that it showed the extent of it, and you knew there and then, sadly for him, that was him out for the season. And until the final against Newcastle, he'd never actually played in a winning final for United, and they had a few in his first few seasons, and I think the first one he missed, that was because of that injury in Eindhoven, and then the Europa League final 2017, he missed that through injury, and also the League Cup final earlier that year and the FA Cup final the next year, he was just not even included in the squad. So he's had a hell of a lot of setbacks, and there have been times where he's really needed to get up to speed. I mean, I put it in a piece about him a couple of years ago, but there was a time when he turned up late at Carrington for training, and he was asked, why are you late? And he said his mother had overslept. And the staff burst out laughing, thinking he was joking. And he was deadly serious. His mum had overslept and had forgotten to wake him up. So he was pretty junior, to say the least, in those formative years at United. But he's bucked up his ideas, and I think he's got a good family around him and a good partner who's been a good influence as well on him. And he's come out the other side.
When I was on the desk in my younger days at university doing work experience, I should have used that excuse and see if I could get a few laughs and if people realised it was a joke that my mum hadn't woke us up. Ty, one of the juicier parts of the press conference today was the Rashford bit where he defended them, obviously, and he discussed his trip to New York, as Samuel hinted at earlier on. It made, for me, complete sense for Rashford to withdraw from that squad, didn't it? He knows his body more than anyone. He did a sit-down with journalists recently and discussed the lengths that he's went through with injury, and it just made sense for him to pull out, take a rest, and kind of recuperate before Newcastle this weekend, doesn't it? And I think it was a good decision, all in all, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think the key was in the wording when it was described as a minor knock. This wasn't, it wasn't a hamstring, it wasn't a muscle injury or anything like that. It was, as soon as he got kicked, I think he was down appealing for a free kick for the goal, wasn't he? I think in the game, in the Fulham game, and I think it could have even have happened then. But a minor knock suggests something as simple as a kick, something like that. And yeah, as soon as that happened, I think it was probably always going to happen that he was going to withdraw. He's played an awful lot this season. I think there's 2 games that he hasn't been involved in for United. 44 of the 46 he's played in. The 2 he wasn't involved in were 2 Europa League games back in September. Even games when he's not started, he's often been brought on and had to influence them. You think of Wolves. There's another one he came on at half-time. He came on against Forest and set up 2 goals. Came on against Charlton and scored 2 goals. So, even when he's tried to rest him, he's often had to come on and make the difference. And I did a piece during the international break. I think he's played 3,200 minutes this season already. So, yeah, he needed the rest. And, I don't think... I think the fact he was in New York suggested that he was going to be fit. I don't think he'd have gone to New York if he'd pulled his hamstring or done something to his calf or groin or anything like that was serious. He's got a minor knock, which suggests to me it was a very minor kick. And away you go and off you go. And Ten Hag saw the New York trip as a positive thing, really recharging and sort of getting your mindset right before the end of the season. So yeah, it did make total sense. And I'm sure there's Gareth Southgate was quick to kind of clarify his comments on international duty. I'm sure there is some frustration there that he has pulled out of I think it's 5 squads he's pulled out of now, but it was understandable this time around. I think it feels like he's going to make that left wing position his own for England at some point. This was probably seen by England as an opportunity for him to do that with Sterling not in the squad, but It is a matter of time. England won both games anyway. Rashford got a rest, so in the end, I think probably everyone was a winner.
You've talked about the need to bring Rashford on time in some games this season. Do you think United are a little bit over-reliant on him, or was that a stupid question? I looked at the numbers and crunched the data. I think he's responsible for 35% of the first team's goals. And I mean, if those goals start to dry up, that's going to become a bit of a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. To a degree, you're always, when someone's scoring at the rate that Rashford's scoring, you're always going to be a little reliant on them. But it is pretty clear that there's no one really in that squad who's backing him up. I think Fernandes is next on 10. There's issues. I was going to say from the wing. I mean, Rashford is a winger, and we know what Weghorst's scoring record is. Those 2 goals now, but there's
both
issues from
well.
Anthony, and that's his strength. Anthony and Jadon Sancho aren't producing enough goals, so there is clearly an issue for more goals. I mean, maybe when Anthony Martial is fit enough to actually play a game, perhaps he'll produce some. But yeah, I think they are clearly reliant on them, and to a degree, you're always going to be reliant on someone like that who is producing that many goals. But if Ten Hag had said he can't play at Newcastle today, I think we'd all be having a discussion now saying where are those goals coming from, and I don't think anyone could really give an answer of where they would come from. So I do think that is something of a concern for them going forward and going into next season.
We'll discuss Martial in a moment, but we'll just leave it there for part 2, and we'll be back in a jiffy for part 3. Samuel, there was obviously discussion about Martial today. He's been in training for 3 weeks now, but he's not actually been part of the squad. He might finally make a return to the squad against Newcastle on Sunday. The question I kind of want to know, and I don't know if it was discussed at the press conference, really, the answer, sorry, is why hasn't he not been in the squad? If he's been training for 3 weeks, surely he's been fit to feature at least or be in the bench.
It is a good question, and I've got to apologise. I should have asked it as my follow-up question, possibly. But I suspect from Ten Hag's perspective, with the internationals coming up, and he may have looked at those games and thought, well, we can get by without him, given that we've got by without him for most of the season. I'll give him extra time to be ready for the Newcastle game, because that is a big game, and that is a game he could influence. He influenced a very big game at the start of the season against Liverpool. He got 2 goals at City. They were 6-1 down, but he still came on and had an impact. He scored the penalty, and he got a goal before that as well. Those games at the start of the season, when he was involved, he was always doing something in them. As soon as he started a succession of games, everybody remembered why United don't really miss Martial that much, which is because he's just too flaky, and he is always going to struggle for consistency. And he's they've made their mind up on him in that they want to sign a new number 9 in the summer, and they want to sell Martial in the summer. Whether they do or not is going to be quite interesting to see how that pans out, because something would have to, maybe it's looking at a club who has historical interest in him and trying to engage them on it, because a lot of clubs will look at his stats, the lack of goals in the last few seasons, the fact that he's not completed 90 minutes in the Premier League since January 2021. He's not completed 90 minutes for United since September 2021. The injury record this season, the injury record a couple of years ago, he missed pretty much the last 2 months of the 2021 season. And although he's still 27 and you could still get quite a lot of mileage out of him, there are a lot of red flags to signing someone that United would want a pretty decent fee for, given that he's the number 9 for Manchester United and he is a France international. So although he's fit and Ten Hag says he's available, I wouldn't be surprised, one, if he does not get off the coach at Newcastle on Sunday and is nowhere to be seen. And I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Weghorst is leading the line again. Ten Hag said unprompted today that he thinks United are better with Weghorst in the team, which a lot of people would dispute that assessment. But it depends what context you're looking at it in. That they've not really had much of a choice with Martial absent for these last. He's been absent for the last 18 games, and that coincided with Weghorst coming into the team, which again, you can talk about the physical nature of it, but it strikes me it's not a coincidence that as soon as a striker or a threat turns up, Martial capitulates, whether it's his form, whether it's his fitness. And obviously he had fitness issues in the first half of the season, but to have had a hip injury that has sidelined him for almost 3 months is some going for a 27-year-old athlete like him. And we know how good he can be when he does hit his stride, but when that last happened it's difficult to recall. He had a very good season in 2019-20, and then the start of the next season he got sent off in the 3rd game, and he never really truly recovered from it that season. I think he only got 7 goals, and he didn't end up going to the Euros with France. And France have had a couple of strikers come through in Nkunku, and they've got Mawani now as well, who started the last couple of European Championship qualifying games. So he's found himself a long way down the pecking order for France, and of course United are actively looking to replace him next season. So it's a strange one for us picking our panel team, because you don't want to put Weghorst there because he can't score. and you do feel a bit daft putting Marshall there, but ultimately he is the main number 9 if he's fit. They've got to start him sooner or later, but I suspect that Sven Botman and Fabian Schär wouldn't be too daunted by the prospect of coming up against Martial. And in fairness to Weghorst, in the first half against Newcastle in the League Cup final, he did all right, and he was unlucky with that shot that Karius tipped away.
I don't know if either of you have actually checked the panel ahead of Sunday, but I did put my team in. I did start Martial. That's my preferred striker for Sunday, and I just thought,
gone with Martial as well.
If he's trained for 3 weeks, he's surely got to be fit. After full training for 3 weeks, you know what I mean? Throw him in. It probably won't be 90 minutes, will it? That's the thing. It'd be 45 or 60.
I think it is the bench.
The chance. Yeah. Regarding the midfield selection, though, Ty, for Newcastle on Sunday at St James's Park, I thought the midfield was a bit of a mess against Fulham in the final game before the international break. Obviously, McTominay, Sabitzer and Fernandes started in the 3. I thought Fred was pretty good when he came on. Who would you start in the 3 on Sunday? Would you agree with me? And probably throw Fred in then, despite McTominay's form, have him on the bench?
I virtually always agree with you, Stephen. So it would, for me, it would be... it's got to be McTominay, Fred and Fernandes. I think that'll be the 3. It's a midfield. We know a lot about that. That trio doesn't exactly surprise anymore. We know what they can do. We've seen them under Solskjaer. I think United fans probably thought they'd moved on from the McFred days, but not just yet. It's kind of, I wrote a piece yesterday and said it's kind of back to the day job for McTominay this weekend. From that freer role for Scotland, it's back to being the holding player at United and having to try and do what Casemiro does. I mean, I don't think he's a natural holding player, McTominay. He's quite hard to pin down in a way. He probably needs a position now because, you two spoke before about how he played as a striker coming through the academy. Scotland have used him as a centre-back in a back 3 before. So, he's almost played every area centrally on the pitch. And Ten Hag's brought him on a couple of times this year as a number 10, almost in the way he used Weghorst as a number 10. Late on away at Leeds and at the Nou Camp, he's used McTominay in that role off the bench a couple of times, just as that advanced midfielder to get on the end of things and cause chaos. Not his best skill, but one of his skills is kind of timing those runs forward. And I think Solskjaer unleashed that a little bit at times, and he's not going to do that playing in the holding midfield role in this midfield under Ten Hag. You saw it at Scotland. You mentioned his 4 goals before. I thought the most noticeable thing of all of them was that every single one of them was a strike running onto the ball into the penalty area. It was a classic. It's almost a little bit Lampard-esque, Scholes-esque in a way, which I'm sure McTominay will take being in that company. But I mean, in terms of that one aspect of his game of timing those runs to be where the ball is in the penalty area from midfield. I mean, Lampard got so many goals like that, and McTominay doesn't do it often, but doesn't really have the freedom to do it that often either, playing for United. So yeah, I think it will be that midfield. I don't think we'll see McTominay doing it. The midfield is going to be a key area because I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that United struggle without Casemiro, apart from Ten Hag, maybe who disagreed with my assessment of that situation 2 weeks ago. But yeah, of the 4 games he's suspended for, I think this is the one we all looked at and thought that's the one you'd really want Casemiro available for. They've been quite lucky really with the suspension that 3 of the games are at Old Trafford. But this one is the one where you look at it and think that could be the one where they really do miss Casemiro.
I think the Newcastle interest... Well, yeah, I think the Newcastle interest in McTominay is fascinating, really, because I think Howe wants him to play in that number 6 holding role, but obviously that's where he's played predominantly for United, but he's always been better in that box-to-box number 8, really, hasn't he? And as you said, Ty, making those late runs into the box. Yeah, definitely. So I wouldn't consider him really as a player that is a natural in sitting in front of that defence and protecting the back line. He wants Guimaraes to play a bit further forward, I think. Regarding that game again, Samuel, on Sunday, I kind of looked into the away form this season against quote-unquote top clubs. And if you look at the quote-unquote big 6 of who United have played away this season, they've took 1 point from games on the road against City, Chelsea, Arsenal and Liverpool. Obviously, Casemiro's late equaliser at Stamford Bridge in October was that point. Is that an area for concern, do you think? Because although they've beat all those teams at home and their Old Trafford form has been fantastic, I think the one criticism of Ten Hag this season and this United team is they've perhaps struggled on the road against better sides. And I think on Newcastle on Sunday, obviously they're sitting fifth now. It's going to be an electric atmosphere, and I think it's going to be a real test for that team.
It will be a genuine concern if they've still got a record like that this time next season. I think for now they can kind of be sanguine with it because nobody's expecting a title challenge from them. Nobody was ever expecting that from them. So given that they're third, you can kind of say that's room for improvement next season because they did beat City, Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham at home. So you can't have it always both ways. But obviously, if you go on a certain run of games against these top teams without winning any of them, then it's going to get a lot more attention. It certainly did about 18 months into Mourinho's tenure. He still hadn't had a win against one of the other so-called big six. I hate using that phrase, especially after the Super League, but sometimes you've got to separate them from the rest. And maybe it will be a new big six next season with Newcastle if they manage to finish up there. But I think more beyond that as well, you look at their record against the teams they've played away from home in the top 10. They've only had one win. That was against Fulham. That was a stoppage time winner from Garnacho. The equaliser at Chelsea was a stoppage time goal as well. So it's Ten Hag has touched upon it in that although United they are a team in his image. I don't think anyone can really dispute that. The way he's improved certain players who were there already and who he inherited, and the players he's brought in, and how they've changed the identity, particularly the defensive identity of the team. But they are still quite a way off from being a controlling team. I think probably one of the biggest pluses from the response to the Anfield game was against Betis. It was probably their most dominant and creative performance all season. When you consider the amount of chances they had that night, they should easily have scored a couple more goals. The opportunities they had, the 4-1 scoreline did flatter Betis, and so that was a positive response to one of those performances. And I completely agree with you in terms of the test of their mettle going to St James's, because if they do lose this game and then Tottenham win against Everton on Monday night, having started the weekend or the match week in third, they drop down to fifth. And then all of a sudden, there's a hell of a lot of pressure on a team who a lot of punters looking ahead to the restart of the Premier League this weekend think that it's a fait accompli that United are going to finish third when it's not. It's a lot tighter than that. I know there are games in hand to take into account, and it does help certainly that the two matches they've got next week are at home against Brentford and Everton. Then it's Nottingham Forest away after that, and watching how well Newcastle performed at Forest, who won quite a long unbeaten home run in the league, it does give other clubs a hell of a lot more hope going there. And the fact that Newcastle ended the run helps, and the way they did it helps them as well in terms of taking that momentum into this game. So it's going to be pretty fascinating. I suppose, watching United in certainly around late February and into March, they did look knackered. They did look like they were a team that were in need of a breather. And if you look at the players who could or should start at Newcastle, Shaw's had a week off because he got sent off in Italy. De Gea has not played in the internationals. Varane didn't play in the internationals. Dalot, I think, only started one of Portugal's 2 games. Obviously, Lisandro Martinez was with Argentina, but Fred had 2 weeks off. He wasn't called up. Sabitzer, if he starts, he didn't play in the second game for Austria, and it appears as though he trained at Carrington this week. Rashford has had time off as well. Anthony, I think, only came on as a sub for Brazil in Morocco. And if Ten Hag does dare to start Martial, he's not played since January. So they've got a much fresher team than they would have had they been playing Newcastle, I don't know, a week after the Fulham game. So that does help. But it's, I don't think a draw would necessarily be a bad result for United going to Newcastle. It certainly was last season. The performance was particularly troubling last season. They were very lucky to come away with a 1-1 there. But given how Newcastle have improved immeasurably this season, I think a point would be pretty decent for United ahead of 2 home games.
was a scrappy Cavani goal, wasn't it? I think around the 75th minute, or around that time anyways, for the 1-1 in that game in December last year.
Yeah.
I said ahead of the Carabao Cup final, I didn't give Newcastle much chance at all, really, because their attacking third, the quality in the final third had gone a bit stale. But they've really, from what I've saw, really got that spark again, just before the break. And I was talking to you, Samuel, about it, but Isaac's helped massively. He looks a real quality player, and he should have been starting ahead of Wilson.
Oh yeah, he should have been starting weeks and weeks ago.
Yeah.
Regarding your expectations, Ty, for Sunday, what are you really expecting from the game? And Samuel's given us a lovely segue into that, because I wanted to discuss, just as we end, their position in the table, because I was trying to tease a bit of title talk, but I've gone from that to looking at the table, and they're only 3 points clear of fifth. How has this happened in the last few weeks? And do you think there's danger of kind of complacency maybe setting in, or do you think that'll happen?
I wouldn't have thought so, but the issue is that I think that the quality of their performances did start to dip towards the end of that stretch between the World Cup and this international break, and I think it was clear they were starting to get tired. And certainly the Fulham performance, while it was 11 against 11, was a very tired performance. And if they do lose on Sunday, then I think suddenly you're looking at the top four race being bang open, especially with United still having to go to Tottenham later this month. Those are the two games really that are going to decide a lot of this narrative. I mean, if United win at Newcastle and win at Tottenham, then it's game over. It's top four easily. It's almost certainly third. If they lose this weekend, then it's very much kind of up in the air again, especially with the fact that they've got so many fixtures to play. I mean, Newcastle and Tottenham, I think, have only got the league left, haven't they? So they've both just got those 12 games for Newcastle, only 10, I think, for Tottenham, to focus on and give their all on. The great unknown is that Newcastle are in a completely unknown situation for them, an unprecedented situation for this group of players, and Tottenham are a laughing stock and a shambles, aren't they? So no one really knows how they're going to react to what's going on there. But they are, they're the Premier League's joke club at the moment. So, and they've been playing poorly under Conte. It's difficult to know how they're going to react. I don't think anyone saw the appointment of Stellini to the end of the season come in, or as caretaker come in, and you could say that they played a lot better under Stellini a few weeks ago when Conte was back in Italy, but still feels like a very strange move. And obviously with everything that's happened around Paratici this week, they are just a bit of a laughingstock at the moment. So I think there's uncertainty around both of United's rivals for that. But I do think if they lost this weekend, we'd certainly be having a debate. The top four is by no means done now. But at the same time, if they get a win, then they take a big step towards it. And on the quality of performances for the last 20 league games, you'd say United really should go and get it done now.
We'll end it there then, gents. Ty, you're at City Liverpool tomorrow, aren't you? But Samuel, you're up in St James's Park on Sunday. So I'll say to Samuel, make sure you get yourself a bottle of brown ale and some stotty bread if you get the chance. And go on, Ty, go ahead. What are you going to say?
It's quite near the
stadium. I'll give you some tips, Samuel, if you want to message us. I've got family that control all the car parks in Newcastle.
Well, I missed it. I missed it last season because I missed it last season because I had COVID. So I had the unfortunate position of having to cover a game from home, which is never great. Pretty soulless, but yeah, it was probably the best stadium during the COVID games in that you were put in a hospitality box to watch the matches, so it was quite pleasant. Unfortunately, I did check the cupboards. There weren't any cheese and biscuits.
Come on, Mike Ashley was in charge. He wasn't going to leave anything for you. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, the cupboards were bare. There was the proof there and there. The cupboards were definitely bare under Mike Ashley in St James's Park.
What I remember from last season is driving home in thick fog down the M1 and on the M62, listening to Scott Boland take 6 for 7 or whatever it was, and England get dismantled for whatever it was on the third. I think it was the third day of the MCG test. So yeah, it was a cracking atmosphere for the game, but the drive home was. I was going to say it's always nice when you've got to drive home at like midnight to have some kind of sport to listen to, but it was pretty depressing all the same, with a wicket falling pretty much every 2 or 3 balls to Scott Boland. So yeah, that's one of my memories from Newcastle away last season.
Should we start a cricket podcast? Even though I really don't like the sport, but I'll happily host it, lads. If you want to
reach out.
Yeah, well, of course, get a new sponsor. We'll leave it there then. Thanks again for your time. Thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thank you very much, Samuel, as usual.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners. Have a great weekend. Take care.